Welcome to the Gaslit Nation Salon for December 8th, 2025. I have an exciting announcement. I was invited to a gathering, a resistance holiday party in Washington, D.C. by a group called Courier News. They're working with the longtime veteran journalist Mark Jacob, who spent his career as a reporter, editor at the Chicago Tribune, old school journalist, total sweetheart. Many of you may know him from social media where he's quite prolific. And now he's helping them work with independent journalists and creators who are doing good work, honest work, decent work in fighting the oligarchy and trying to claw back our democracy from the hands of kleptocracy. And so they invited me to come to Washington, D.C. this Thursday, December 11th. I'll be speaking on a panel with Brian Butler, who was a longtime crooked media guy, and now he's independent, and also, some other folks. I will drop an event link in the chat. But if you're in Washington, D.C., I hope you'll join me because there's food at a bar, and it's in the heart of Washington, D.C. So I look forward to seeing the troops that Trump surrounds himself with because he's scared of us, just like Yanukovych before him. And I wanted to talk to Holly later in this salon about media because the whole panel discussion we're having is on the capitulation of the media. And they asked the panelists to come up with actionable events. And so whatever you want me to deliver on behalf of the Media and Democracy Project, I will absolutely share that in my remarks, Holly. So let me know. So just to open up this salon discussion, we are going to look at the book of the month it was supposed to be October, but because we're living in the age of Armageddon, things got pushed back, and the Gaslit Nation Book Club discussion is happening now. And the two books that we were supposed to read for the month of October, we're now discussing. And those are Total Resistance by H. von Dach and Deaf Republic, a book of poems kind of in a play format by Ukrainian-born poet Ilya Kaminsky. And I chose those two books because they're basically saying the same thing. When your life is at risk, when you are physically, spiritually cornered by terror, by occupation, by a dictatorship, you as the people, you as an individual, you have agency. No matter what, you have agency. That is what those two books are trying to say. I think that's extremely important because as we've had discussions on this show about civil disobedience, nonviolent resistance, people have to wrap their heads around that now. And I'm telling you this because I've been at this for so long now, and I've watched the worst happen. I've watched the worst nightmares, the worst case scenario happen again and again and again. And people, because humans are so resilient as a species, people increasingly accommodate to the worst case scenario. We were constantly living in a worst case scenario with the temperature turned up. I'm sure you all realize that because that's why you're here. And I promise you, as bad as things are, they could always get worse. And I'm not saying that to scare you. Why would I want that? I don't want that for myself. I don't want that for anyone. But I'm being perfectly honest with you where things are and where the signs are. And I'm looking at the much longer vision of how we got here. We're living among the unthinkable. And a very clear sign of that is the fact that Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and I know so many people in the broader community, in the mainstream media, in the Washington, D.C. bar that is Blue Sky, a lot of the media voices of today are tired of hearing about this, but it is everything about where we are because the battle lines have so clearly been drawn. And we don't want this war. We don't want to be in war, but they do. They very much do. And to emphasize this point, Putin very accurately has come out and stated that the Russian position and the American position in terms of Ukraine is now aligned. And it's of course, no kidding. Why wouldn't it be? Trump was a failed, corrupt, spoiled trust fund kid who inherited a fortune, went bankrupt 6 times. The only credible institution that would lend to him was Deutsche Bank, originally the Nazi bank, and now in recent history, they also launder money for the other fascists, the Russians. And so how else was corrupt, 6 times bankrupt Trump going to make a fortune? By helping the Russians move their money abroad, launder their money abroad. His dad made a fortune building a Brighton Beach. Then the son, Donald, comes in and makes a fortune building up Little Isles, Florida, Little Moscow, where the FBI has had to raid apartments there owned by LLCs and so on, connected to the Russian government and oligarchs around them. And on it goes. If you think about the idea that we all had of Trump 10 years ago, he was that guy on The Apprentice. Well, Christian nationalist Mark Burnett, before he went to Trump, tried to do a reality show on Putin. And that didn't happen, but Mark Burnett jumps immediately from Putin and goes straight to Trump and packages the Trump family as credible business people with serious business acumen and packages them to a mainstream crowd. And that helps drive their movement across America and so on and so on. You know all this because you've listened to the show. So I'm just calling on everybody to please accept the fact that America has fallen. It took a while, but the Kremlin, this is very important. This is the one big takeaway of every single show of Gaslit Nation. The Kremlin plays the long game. They've taken America off the board. America's effectively under occupation by one of their kleptocrats. And now they're gunning for Europe. All signs are there. And it's not just the usual like Elon Musk trash talking Europe and firing up the bot farms and Twitter and rallying all of the far right under Bannon's leadership and so on. It's also a lot of terrorism. It's also drones, swarms of drones. It's also mysterious explosions and so on across the continent. This is it. This is everything. This is like my internal monologue. I keep thinking, I watched America fall. I watched myself be completely ignored. I watched the misogyny. I watched the bullshit. I watched the stupid popularity contests of media that I will never, ever, ever be able to win and be completely ignored throughout it all. And I watched my country fall here, my country here. And then I watched my other country, Ukraine, fall. I watched the unimaginable happen and then the unimaginable happen. And I hate this feeling because I'm back at it again. And now I'm looking at Europe and I'm thinking, am I going to watch Europe fall? Is that where this is headed? Because that's where it looks like it's headed. And I don't want to deliver this. And I'm grateful to you that you're even here and paying attention because most people are not. And it's such bullshit that's happening out there in the broader media landscape, the broader media world. You see it, I see it, that's why you're here. And it's not even just a horrible helplessness. It is that too. It's just a feeling like get your head out of your ass. You don't know what it's like to live under that occupation. You don't know what it's like to live under a kleptocracy. Like I'm talking to you, talking to the broader media landscape, as you know. And I don't know what to do anymore to wake them up. And I'm just at the point where I'm like, do I just get in survival mode with myself and my family? I'm not saying like leave America because there's nowhere to go. It's more just like people don't understand what's coming if we don't stop this and turn it around. They really don't. Americans just simply don't. It's just the ruling class of the intellectual elite. That includes the entire political spectrum. A lot of fancy folks who are never Trumpers, anti-Trumps and so on, they don't fully grasp it either. They just think that they're going to be able to continue doing their shows, continue doing all that stuff. It's not like that. It doesn't work like that. And I promise you, from the perspective of people that have been impacted by this war, the before and after of the unimaginable happening and how it hits your life, it's just there. It's like a phantom limb. I know people might think, well, Ukrainians are right on the border with Russia. Of course, this would happen to them. That's not us. We're at a point where I don't want to say it's a point of no return, but it's like people need to really wake up now. People need to really wake up. And that brings us to our book club discussion. These books were chosen intentionally to say, maybe we should all be having these conversations and prepare for this. Total Resistance was a book written by a Swiss Army major, von Dach, and he wrote it in the context of the Russians sending 1,000 tanks to crush the Hungarian resistance, the Hungarian uprising. Following the death of Stalin in 1953, Churchill goes and gives a speech to all the communist leaders assembled in Moscow that was so shocking. He denounces the cult of Stalin. A few of these leaders, communist officials, died by suicide. That's how shocking it was. And Khrushchev's basically admitting, we were wrong. We need to atone. Stalin was actually a bad guy. We need to do things differently. And we need to also give autonomy to all of our satellite states and so on. Like it's a KGB dictatorship cult. Imagine like the KGB dictatorship head of the cult saying, hey, Jonestown, maybe we don't need to drink the Kool-Aid. And everyone's like, but I'm going to drink it anyway. Some of them said that. And so what ends up happening in this sort of post-death of Stalin weirdness, this sort of dreamscape where even the citizens could feel it, because the leaders themselves were like, okay, well, we're going to liberalize. We're going to be more open. We're not going to be as extreme. And that varied, of course, across the entire Soviet Union and the satellite states. But taking advantage of this moment of essentially a vacuum of power, for lack of a better term, it was because, of course, there was still was the dictatorship, but there was still a thaw that was happening. And as a result, the workers and the students rose up. They took full advantage, and the Americans, the Brits, took full advantage and pumped resources into radio, pirate radio, smuggling books and things. And you had a youthquake. Protests shook the Iron Curtain in 1956. Poland, Czechoslovakia, so on. The most famous one, of course, was the Hungarian uprising, because the Hungarians were able to go to full-on war. So military and police came to their side. They were able to get guns, Molotov cocktails. They were hanging Soviet soldiers, blowing out Soviet tanks. It was beautiful. They're on the front page of Time magazine, Hungarian freedom fighter. It was a massive moment for the world. And I just want to point out, just to ground us in this moment of time, what was happening on the other side of the planet. A young Martin Luther King Jr. was leading the Montgomery bus boycott in Alabama. So something was in the air in 1955, 56. It was just a beautiful age of people fighting back, like Arab Spring in America, Arab Spring in Europe. And in response to this, Khrushchev basically breaks his promise to Soviet officials by going full Stalin. He sends 1,000 tanks into Hungary. One woman I talked to was a little girl in Poland witnessing the tanks rolling through. I asked her, where'd the tanks come from? And she said, where do you think they came from? Russia. And so the tanks roll across I'm laughing because, Eastern European women. So the tanks roll on through to Hungary. People get killed. Massive refugee crisis all over, destabilizing, horrifying. So that goes back to Total Resistance. That book was written in reaction to that. Now, with the Iron Curtain, half of Europe was under Russian occupation. So von Dach decided to make a guerrilla guide where citizens can feel empowered to take calculated risks and do things large and small to disrupt the dictatorship. And that included psyops, propaganda, how to destabilize communications and phone lines. And obviously some of the strategies are outdated in our very tech surveillance world. It'd be fantastic to get an upgraded version of this manual. That's an idea for the Gaslit Nation Security Committee, by the way. So it was an explosive manual that sold like 10,000 copies in his native Switzerland. It managed to get abroad around 10 years later and took off like wildfire among leftist groups that were kicking things off with all the progressive movements, liberation movements, the radicalization, the hippie movement, all that stuff. The massive political earthquakes that were happening in America in the 60s and 70s. And so it became sort of an outlaw's book for the left. And now in recent years, and I know this because I've watched the videos in preparation for this, the militias, and they call themselves the militias, the MAGA voters, the white men, like very bulky white men all over YouTube. They say, hey, brother, they do these YouTube videos. Hey, brother, for all the militia brothers out there, I want to talk to you about a book. And it's so funny because they go through it and they quote the book talking about like warning about concentration camps and military watching you and grabbing you off the street. Who is doing that? Their side is doing that. Their side is building and expanding camps. Their side is kidnapping people off the street. Just the painful irony of those videos. So in recent years, it's become a MAGA survivalist guide that they all share and love, but they lose the historical context. I mean, they'll mention that it was written in response to the Cold War, but Russia occupied half of Europe, and Russia helped bring their dear leader to power. If von Dach were alive today, he would be calling them out as the stupid tools of the Russian regime. That's very much what he would say. One of these YouTube videos, the guy was like, von Dach is telling us that we are under liberal occupation. I'm like, no, he is not. In fact, he wrote and published this book at great risk to his own personal career, because what happens is he gets stuck at the rank of major in the military. He never gets promoted. And there was consideration to even make his book official strategy in the Swiss military, and that was voted down. So basically, the establishment that he was a part of try to distance themselves from him and his work, essentially. And so he was sort of this, I don't say destroyed his career, but it very much stunted his career. people, it's sort of like, we like you, we think you're cool, but we just don't want to be seen with you because we're careerists and we care about making money and our own status. But he did the right thing. He basically sacrificed himself to create a guide that people desperately needed and has gone on to help people. Like, for instance, as I've mentioned before, there were copies of this book given out on thumb drives to Ukraine at the very start of Russia's invasion 10 years ago. Now that brings us to Ilya Kaminsky's Deaf Republic, which is a stunning, stunning short book of poetry. And that also, again, looks at the agency of the individual under occupation. And the story looks at a fictionalized town. It feels like Ukraine. He's from Ukraine, where the occupying forces kill a deaf boy. And the entire town just reacts organically by going deaf and not hearing any orders and just refusing to comply because they're all deaf now. And they all do it. They all just fall in line, helping each other in this collective action. And it's a beautiful story. And the book has a famous line that has traveled like wildfire on social media. And the quote from Deaf Republic is, "At the trial of God, we will ask, why did you allow all this?" So those are the two books. That's why I chose them. And I chose them to basically say, we all need to get on this wavelength. It's not hysterical. Just think about where things have gone in the last 10 years. Think about where things have gone. None of this is normal. All of this is the product of well-laid plans by various factions that have united for their own selfish motivations. We've covered that many times on the show. And I do want to underline once again the point. Don't take for granted the fact that the Kremlin plays the long game. They play the long game. Think in decades. Think about where we are in this moment of time and now think forward in decades. This isn't going to end with Putin. We know that because he's being propped up by a larger machine. And so when he goes, yeah, there's going to be the usual sort of instability. Some people will try to take advantage of it. Certainly, absolutely. But they're making so much money off this war. The Russian oligarchs themselves are war profiteers. So they're going to find somebody to replace them. It might be shaky for a while. There might be a lot of car bombs, and Ukraine will certainly do its darndest to try to exploit the chaos. I don't know how it changes other than the Russians themselves changing it. The thing is, we don't really have a strong resistance, united resistance, or culture of resistance among the Russians to really help in this effort. But what I'm saying is, please, please, please never lose sight of the fact ever. And as you read the news, as events unfold in the coming months and years, never, ever, ever forget the Kremlin plays the long game. Think in decades.